Gaywyck by Vincent Verga. Publisher Allison Books, Los Angeles, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. Chapter 16. Cale's disappearance had disrupted the entire household. Ambrose greeted me with a circumspect glance and a short question. "Brian told you?" I answered with a nod before asking, "You've looked everywhere." He responded with a nod and remained silent. In the carriage, Brian had assured me the house was searched and the surrounding grounds explored, foot by inch. "Has Danough been informed?" "No." "Why not?" "We're waiting to be sure. No one wants to tell him. No one wanted to tell you." At tea, I waited. The arrival of my 3 companions. After a decent interval, I ate alone. Ambrose grunted, annoyed, when I demanded an explanation. They're looking for the feline if they know what's good for them. It was a dreadful time for me. Everything white in my peripheral vision was Cale. Every soft sound was Cale. Every bang, thud, scratch, or bird twitter was Cale. At night, I missed the pressure of his body against my head. I'd hesitate before moving or stretching or turning, forgetting there was no risk of his being squished. I was in danger without my guardian angel. A black orchid appeared in my water jug. The picture of the twins was turned to face the wall as though they were being punished. A chair was moved closer to my bed, where someone had sat for how long? A gold ring was tucked under my pillow. I wore the ring on my right hand when I visited my secret friend before tea on the 3rd day. "Shall I wear one too?" she queried. "Then everyone will be able to tell us apart." Mary Rose adores Denver's idea. Gaylord thinks it's a silly joke. He laughed in the poor man's face. He takes pleasure in humiliating him. Nanny says that is behind everything. She's usually right. Dear, I will admire, laugh, rejoice, exult when Gaylord is in the darkest abyss. Removing the ring, I went to Denver's after tea. "Who saw him last?" "We all did," he defiantly said, "in your empty chair during dinner." "Maybe he's run away?" "You can't believe that. Gone in search of you." "I'm certain Keyes is responsible." I went to Keyes. "He's jealous of me, that nasty old 7-fingered toad. He did it. Who else could he be? So... I left without pursuing anything. I did not want to know. All I wanted was Cale back on my pillows. I sorted the information. What could they have overlooked? The cottage. He may have got locked into one of the rooms. The stable. He may have curled into a corner for 5 days. What about Mr. Saunders? Perhaps Cale was bested by a testy raccoon and was laid up on the hearth of the gatehouse. It was time to find out. I sent Joshua on the errand. I visited Jones. He answered my soft knock immediately, sprawled naked on a bare rug in front of the raging coal fire. He lay glancing through a sporting paper. Scattered towels suggested a recent bath. "You should don a robe, Jones. You'll catch a cold." "There are a lot of things I can catch in this position, Robbie boy. A cold ain't one of them. What do you want?" "I wonder..." "Fuck off, if it's about that goddamn cat. Save your breath," he shouted, leaping to his feet, flinging the paper over the sofa. He stood with his hands on his hips. He was practically hairless, and, though slight of nature, was nicely proportioned, with well-defined muscles. "You like what you see?" I tuttered lamely and said goodbye. Retrieving his paper, he settled again before the fire, calling after me provocatively. "You're welcome any time, you know, Robbie. Yeah, there's a lot I could teach you. Might be handy someday. I closed his door and opened mine. To my astonishment, the sight of him in front of the fire, the flames colored his white flesh, stayed with me. I thought of the men in the gymnasium, then of Danough Gaylord. The images surged and excited me. The mind plays a great role in this. I thought, perhaps greater than the senses. Joshua returned with a message from Mr. Saunders. Cale often rested on his hearth after a journey from the main house, but he had not been seen for several days. I tugged on a coat and went to question Mr. Harrington. If he had no answers, I would request Anita for a morning ride to the farm. On the way, I stopped at the cottage to see if any windows were open. Nothing. I had much better luck at the stable. I found Cale. I spotted him this afternoon, Mr. Robert. I don't know how long he's been hiding. He started to whimper from hunger as soon as my son got back from school. I was going to send you a message to the house. While tending to Cale, Mr. Harrington found broken bits of shell and seaweed in his matted coat. Several ribs were badly bruised. He doubted they were broken. A visit to the veterinarian was in order. What happened? He either fell off the rocks or was kicked. Wrapped in a large wool blanket, Cale woke and struggled free. He hobbled to me, leaning his bandaged body against my leg. I patted his head, afraid to lift him. Mr. Harrington laughed, said the cat was fit to travel, and arranged him comfortably in a wicker basket for me to carry home. During the walk, I decided not to make an issue of the incident. What was the point? I'd only stir up the hornets in our nest, initiate a steam fest, then be universally loathed for the action. I had my Cale back. That was enough. I promised to keep a sharper eye on him in the future. February was a cruel month, locking us into the house together. The delayed response to my father's death came in the form of an immense depression. I withdrew, ignoring everyone. Taking meals in my room one afternoon during a ferocious winter storm, I dared open my father's journal. I read as if it were addressed to me. Often I stopped closing my eyes to answer him, to reassure him, to promise him I would not make the same mistakes with my life that he had made with his. Father Howard's word, tormented, had not been exaggeration. My father experienced agonies at finding himself in that house without love, without tenderness. He blamed no one. He struggled to understand. He lived without hope and prayed for death. He allowed himself neither joy nor solace in his love for Michael Howard. He never questioned his feelings, yet when he wrote of his friend, a sense of peace informed his language. I read quickly, eager to see if he ever recognized the quality of their relationship and the nourishment available to him. But he never wrote of it. I pictured him sitting with Father Howard, feeling bereft, all alone. I closed the book, wanting to believe he had not murdered his heart. I needed to believe he accepted the truth and had not written it down. Following my thoughts, I never heard Jones enter. The overview of grief and hopelessness in my father's vision crushed me. Covering my eyes with my arm, I called his name and cried for us both. Jones gently stroked my head. I gasped at his unexpected touch. "Oh, when my dad died," he said consolingly, "I cried for months, and I always thought I hated him." "I never did, my father." Like Danvers says, who does? February passed. Snowbound, I worked tremendously hard, achieving more in the month than all the months before. Besides my journal, the piano, and 2 hours a day in the gymnasium, I began a correspondence with Danough Gaylord that sustained our intimacy. The letters were extensions of my journal. I shared with him almost without reservation. Our correspondence grew from the letter I wrote, expressing my gratitude for his understanding, his kindness, and his tenderness. I told him he was right in assessing the pain of saying goodbye. I thanked him for being my friend. I did not expect an answer, but answer he did. A long letter arrived. He said how much my letter impressed him, how Rarely persons share their feelings simply and directly, without embarrassment, and how pleased he would be if I occasionally wrote, "Could I find the time?" Because he missed me, he was lonely in New York, and he wished me nearer. He closed with thanks for my friendship and regretted my having said it first, my having gotten the jump on him. And so it began and continued twice a week until Easter. At first he wrote of superficial things. His evenings, for example, descriptions of various operatic performances, concerts, musicals, of theatrical events. The doings of Goodbody and Mortimer filled the pages, bringing his fantastical imagination and outrageous sense of humor into play. Often his observations made me laugh out loud. I was already aware of his quiet wit. I was delighted to discover a blazing satirical touch as well. Most of the funniest statements were attributed to one Osric, the cockatoo with a difference, the bird about town. And then his letters took a more private, more personal turn. It was after I mentioned the delight I took in the lower garden. I had written that walking down the old broken stone steps into the enclave was exciting and mystical, a bit like loving. I felt at peace by the ancient dolmen, eternally safe. I felt hidden from all shocks there. He answered immediately and in one sitting. Normally his letters were composed over several evenings, like a diary. First he asked a question. From what are you hiding now? Then he confessed. The lower garden is my favorite place at Gaywyck. Even dearer to me than the oak stand. Nothing unpleasant ever happened there. I cannot imagine why. It seems created for just such a purpose. When I enter there, I feel like an innocent, pure, untouched, and unused, a stranger to the devil. I asked if he were now a companion to the devil. He answered, and who is not? Except maybe you, who are good. I sent him a short, tight note. I see what you are. You are too proud. But if you were the devil, you are fair. By return post, I received the rest of the quote. My lord and master loves you. Oh, such love could be but recompensed, though you were crowned the nonpareil of beauty. I responded by admonishing him for harboring dark thoughts about himself and for believing that I, in my ethereal sanctity, would have any love for the devil. The fact of our love had effortlessly entered our letters as naturally as the salutation, my dear Danough, replaced dear Mr. Danough. And the word love replaced always, which had replaced sincerely at the closing. We often wrote of love as an emotion and an absolute. It was he who clarified a fundamental truth. I had written in a gush of romantic fervor that I dreamed of loving someone more than I loved myself. He chastised me. I copied his words into my journal. Later, much later, I remembered them, but by then it was too late. Robert, one must always love oneself first, never hurting or betraying oneself. I think one must strive to live with, not for or through. Another time I mentioned how difficult it was for me to overcome the feelings of isolation and of loneliness. He wrote of similar pain. I over-insulate myself. Too much self-control. I am afraid of suffering. I've never thought suffering natural, as Cormac did, but as punishment for some error of judgment. I will do anything to avoid it. Often I lock myself away. I think I am now more frightened of living my life alone. However, it is awesomely difficult to change. March was one continuous downpour. One long piss, as Jones put it. I had never experienced so much wet. Although fires were constantly burning in most of the rooms, the damp was maddening. It seemed to weep through the walls into everything and everyone. And for the few hours free of rain, we had mist as dense as wool, rubbing against the panes. The sea, viewed from my windows, resembled a boiling cauldron. One morning, over breakfast, Denvers requested of God that he move his production of Spring to another county. As a group, we did not thrive on the rain. Denvers and Keyes barely exchanged a civil sentence the whole month long, and if Beethoven had not entertained after tea, Keyes would never have survived dinner. Denvers worked diligently in his study most of the day. Jones sulked. When not sulking, he complained loudly and assiduously of boredom. When not bemoaning his fate, he drumbled and yawned noisily. Fortunately, he slept almost as much as Cale. The only one who seemed undisturbed by the deluge was my secret friend. "God's watering his garden," she'd say in her Farik manner, over and over on each of my clandestine visits. I requested he pay special attention to Mary Rose's beloved tulips. He said he would. "Aren't you worried the bulbs will drown?" "Bulbs don't drown, dear. Only people and animals and insects drown. We pay our gardeners to tend to such things. Proper drainage is essential to healthy flowers and shrubs." "I am happy to see you wearing your ring, dear. Tonight at the masquerade ball I shan't be wearing mine, of course." "I'm going as the Rossetti. I wish I could show you my costume, but Lucy is pressing the skirt. It's an exact copy. I'm to win the prize. Mary Rose will be unhappy. Unhappiness is her morphine. Cormac doesn't love her anymore. Love is not a tender thing. It pricks like thorns. Give liberty to your eyes. If love be blind, love cannot hit the mark. Blind is his love, and best befits the dark. Why not come tonight as Juliet?" She magnified my sense of isolation, entering her cloistered universe with the boundaries of time and space no longer extant, and androgyny rampant, removed me further from reality. Living in a mansion on the edge of the land imposes a solitude like none I had ever experienced. Time dissolved. Weeks evaporated. The sea became our guardian, sternly ever-present, ever-changing, yet always the same and relentlessly tapping on the shore to keep us cognizant of ourselves as perishable in the elements. The only consolation was Easter's rapid approach. The moon being obligingly full early that month, I wrote to Danough warning that Gaywyck might be adrift before his arrival. He answered I was not to worry. He that has an house to put his head in has a good headpiece. I am an expert celestial navigator. Wherever you are, I will find you. In spite of the rains, I took long walks, warmly wrapped in my Aran Island sweater and my mackintosh, my cap, ear flaps down, and a pair of fishing boots. I stalked the grounds from the oak stand to the farm, from the seashore to the gatehouses. Gaylord's domain became mine. I watched winter wash away. I watched the dark brown branch pale, preparing to shoot forth leafage. It was the beginning of the cycle, and I felt attuned as I had never been before. I anticipated, I drew parallels, I constructed metaphors, I wrote poems, the best of which I sent to him. He praised my sense of rhythm and facility for locating the eccentric rhyme, admitting he preferred the bunch of violets I shipped the same day via Price Jones and an accompanying note. I said I was pleased they had not withered all when my father died, because he had always loved their fragrance, and citing them had returned that memory to me. Later, when I learned from Ambrose that the twins would go violet, gathering every year under those exposed, gnarled roots of the great elms, I was grateful to Danough for allowing me the sentimental self-indulgence. Of late, he had been less patient with my flagrant romanticism, regularly warning me of its inherent dangers. The violets brought gaiety to our table that night. Danough observed that I rarely wrote of my companions. I was not purposely avoiding the subject. They had become sensitive areas because of my feelings about Jones, and I had grown to suspect they hated me with the excess loathing they had for each other and themselves. From then, I made a point of mentioning something innocuous about them most of the time, such as Keys using the violets in his bath powder. I dared to say to him that I knew sex and love were closely related, that sex was the direct expression of love, and ideally should not perhaps be encouraged on its own, divorced from emotion. I dropped that into other random thoughts about Plato's notion of passion being directed toward good. More honestly, it belonged in a paragraph about my infuriating envy for Jones's sexual experience. Danough, of course, agreed with me, though he knew for most people the two were not always fused. I valued my innocence because I knew it was something Danough Gaylord loved with trepidation. I asked if he thought goodness and innocence one and the same, a concept I had grown weary of. He said no, definitely not. I was profoundly relieved. I wanted to be good always. I did not want to remain always innocent. The tulips poked through the soil and the rains moved to another county. It became April. I wrote detailing the marvels of Gaywyck, hoping to hasten him on his pilgrimage. In a week, they would be arriving for 4 days. With the warmth of the sun, everything changed. Gardeners appeared, clipping, pruning, and unwrapping, raking and prodding in every corner. I learned the names and helped in small ways. My body pulsed with an overabundance of energy. Before breakfast each morning, I started racing my shadow several miles along the beach. Along the curving, ragged edges of the sea, I had begun that particular exercise accidentally while playing with kale. It was so exhilarating that I continued, wearing only gymnasium shorts. I sucked the cool, ripening air into myself and leaped as Kale had done the first dawn we had played together in the surf. I collapsed into bed hours earlier than usual. My appetite increased alarmingly, and I grew 2½ inches. I was exactly 6 feet tall and weighed 155 pounds. Danough was still 4 inches taller and 45 pounds heavier. My sequestered friend inquired after the tulips each day, and I assured her they were thriving. Like everything else, I tried never to reflect on who or what she was and who or what she believed me to be. I knew I would have answers soon enough. In the beginning, I figured she thought me a gypsy, an unflattering assumption. Those nomads had inhabited the environs of every major city in her youth and were never regarded as anything but evil. Then it was clarified. She thought me escaped from gypsies. And then I passed it by. Poor Ophelia, divided from herself and her fair judgment, without the which we are pictures, or mere beasts. The visits were necessarily brief, and one never seemed connected to the other. The time was cheerily spent in greetings and observations on the state of the natural world, when she segued into an incident involving him, or them. I allowed myself to become engrossed, ever greedy for gossip about the past. Cormac loved playing with knives. It was a fascination I objected to strenuously. First, he decapitated Mary Rose's tulips. Then he cut up Denver's hand. Cormac tells me Denver's wants him incarcerated in a boarding school. Revenge, he says, for taking Gaylord's love. I said, Cormac, you cannot go around cutting off people's fingers, dear. It will make people want to send you away. Denver's knows what he is doing. He sees quite clearly, and he's not happy. The visits, though unsatisfying in many respects, were important to me. Spiritually, they kept me close to my mother. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold. To offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides. And in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time. and being true to their values.